Climb into the cockpit with pilot and Link Square's Chief Legal Officer, Tim Perilla, as he invites legal leaders aboard to share advice that will help you navigate even the most turbulent times of in-house counsel work. We'll cover a range of topics from data privacy to legal team structure to public company transactions and beyond. You don't want to miss this series. Fasten your seatbelt and prepare for takeoff. You're listening to Cockpit Counsel.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Cockpit Counsel. My name is Tim. I'm the Chief Legal Officer at Link Squares. And if you like our content, please like, follow, subscribe on all the socials. And yeah, let's get going. So today we have Hayley McNeill from Zywave, and as always, our outstanding producer, Alyssa Verzino. So welcome.
Yeah, excited to be here.
So let's talk a little bit about your role. You're in legal ops. Tell me a little bit how you found yourself in legal operations.
Yeah, kind of fell into it a little bit. I studied history during my undergrad in art history and then went directly into a master's program for history and had this dream of getting my PhD, being in academia, being a professor. And then I was like, well, this is not a stable career path. I need to do something different, and just looked at the skills that I gained through history and kind of figured out where I could use those separately, and which is how I got into the legal world. And I worked as a paralegal at a litigation firm. Okay. And doing a lot of product liability stuff, so looking at a lot of house fires. Right. And then
literally and figuratively.
Yep. And then I was like, I don't like this. Yeah. I do not like the litigation world. I do not like working in a very small office where you don't have a lot of mobility. Right. So thankfully I was able to find a job in-house working at Zywave as a paralegal there. Mm-hmm. And I just grew as the company grew. So I've been with them for about 5 years now and grew from a paralegal to where I am now as a legal operations manager.
And how big is the legal ops function, and how big is the legal team?
Yeah, so the legal team is 6 people. Okay. And 3 of us are legal operations.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, so it's myself and then my 2 team members.
It's a luxurious structure.
I know, right?
Had that. So I did forget this, and we can edit this out, but we start every show the same way. It is a pilot-themed podcast here. What is your pre-flight ritual?
Yes, so I refer to it as the introvert's dream. Okay. I make sure that I have my headphones, that I have my Kindles fully charged. I've downloaded any books or audiobooks or podcasts that I'm listening to.
Cockpit Counsel, of course.
Exactly, number one every time. And then, funny enough, every time I get to the airport and get through security, I always buy a bag of Twizzlers Bits. Okay, nice. That's been my airport snack for probably the past 10 years. The That's only awesome. Time I eat those. So, it's just automatic at this point. I get through security and I go and I buy them, and that's my little plane snack.
It's the airline treat yourself.
Exactly.
That's awesome. So, all right. So you've got 3 legal ops, 3 attorneys. Mm-hmm. How do you divide up the work, or is it just kind of everyone attacks everything?
It's somewhat based on the priority of our customers. Okay. So obviously, our larger partners, we're going to have more attention to them, and that's going to be more in the attorney's realm. Okay. While any of our smaller customers are kind of more standard customers, we tend to use our legal operations team for when we're working with contracts. Okay. Anything we can kind of build a process around. Mm-hmm. Our documentation around, that's what we use our legal ops function for in order to get less work off their attorneys' plates. Right. To be able to have them really dig into, MSA negotiations and red lines and things of that nature, until we're able to kind of build up our legal operations team more with their education to help tackle some of those easier and more straightforward ones.
That makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. And so with the type of work that your team does, is it primarily contract-based, or is there a lot of other, what percentage would you say is contract-based? I
would say a large percentage is contract-based, both for our commercial and our corporate contracts. Yep. So our legal operations team, with the assistance of attorneys when needed, do a lot of the vendor and procurement process review. Yep. And then, commercial contracts are our number one focus, because ultimately, We got to be a business. We got to get money through the door, and we got to support them.
And that's how you make money, right?
Yeah, exactly. But then otherwise, we always have kind of like various projects going on, different reviews that we're doing just in order to keep up our efficiencies and dealing with compliance issues as well.
Very cool. So how different was your role as a paralegal versus what you're doing now? I mean, obviously, the titles and sort of the mandates are very clearly different. But when you're growing from one role into the next, I would imagine you're kind of expected to wear both hats to a certain extent.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing for me is now being able to work more cross-functionally, like more directly cross-functionally, as well as being able to like build out processes and figure out like what the next project is, or like what the next thing we have to tackle is. I think like as a paralegal, I was going through a lot of the contract process. I was like focused on contracts mostly while still doing one-off things. And as I've grown, like I said, as I grew with the company, it was kind of like, okay, we have some like major roadblocks here. Like we're working with accounting closely, but what about all these other departments that we work with closely? Like how can we make that work where it's not just becoming this like email chain of 50 people that don't need to be on this email chain? Like let's figure out like what's going on here and what's the root cause here, as well as like how can we repeat this in the most efficient way? So being able to see that and then act on it versus just kind of being like, as a paralegal, being like, this doesn't seem like the best process, but this is what we're doing right now, and we just need to get it through the door. So, like, let's do it.
Right. Brute force.
Exactly. Yeah, and then also just being, like, the legal representation for a lot of, like, company-wide meetings or cross-functional meetings of, like, I'm the one that will, like, sit in on those versus one of the attorneys where they're more focused on closing those deals.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And how was the transition from the law firm to the in-house environment?
It's great. I think it was interesting because like I didn't start out thinking like I'm going to be a paralegal. I want to work in a law firm.
Right.
So like I never got a paralegal certificate. I never did any of that stuff. I just like knew how to like figure it out and like to tackle it. But one thing I very quickly noticed within working in a law firm is that it's kind of like, okay, you're the paralegal, therefore you're the support.
Yep.
Like it's very much like a hierarchy of like attorney, paralegal.
Yeah.
And I feel like by moving in-house, there wasn't that hierarchy so much anymore. And this, might be team environment. But it's just understanding that like we have different skills and we have different focuses and we need to both use those and both work together to complete what we need to complete.
Right.
So being able to have that more like even level like work environment to just really boost up like, okay, yeah, I'm not support. I'm not less than anybody. I'm not more than anybody. We're just like working on this together.
Right.
And that's what I've tried to do with my team as well is like, okay, yeah, you may be focusing on like the day-to-day tasks. You may be like working on like the small customizations we do for contracts. But you're still very much impacting the bigger picture and making sure that we all know that.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the law firm environment, with the pressures of litigation and deadlines, and I'm sure enormous amounts of discovery and all of that, like, have you found that pressure has really helped you maintain organization or sort of a project management focus in-house now?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely see that of just kind of being able to keep things, within these different chunks. And I think the other thing too with pressure is that the way I've seen it is that within the litigation world, like there is pressure to get things done and get things out the door.
Yep.
But it's also playing the game of like against the other party.
Of course.
Like what are we holding back? Like, are we going to intentionally delay this? Are we not going to
Right.
So it's like a weird type of pressure where it's sometimes like, okay, we're not going to worry about this for now. We're going to let it be and we're going to like deal with it later.
Yeah.
While in-house, it's very much like we want to be efficient as possible.
Right.
We want to be effective. We want to get things done in order to like not be the holdup. And I think that goes for like working cross-functionally.
Yes.
Obviously, when you're like redlining, you're still working against another party, so it's a little different. But you still want to be ultimately the one that's like pushing it to be like, we're not the delay here.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting because when you're, particularly if you're in a firm that's doing plaintiff's work like that, like there's a different definition of being effective than what you have in-house. Like if in-house teams ran like plaintiffs litigation firms, it probably wouldn't be particularly successful.
No, not at all.
But at the same time, if a plaintiff's firm ran like an in-house team, they probably wouldn't be particularly successful either.
Yeah, yeah, definitely different worlds.
Yeah.
different things that they need.
Yeah, different objectives. So it's awesome that you've had the opportunity to work more cross-functionally across the business. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how you approach building those relationships?
Yeah, for sure. One thing that I've been really focused on the past 6-8 months is just directly reaching out to people that I've worked with in these different areas of people that are kind of at my level or a little bit higher, just to have those 15-20 minute conversations with them, whether it's about work or not, just to fully solidify that relationship that we've built over projects and emails and all that.
Right.
Just to have that, virtual FaceTime a little bit more. And then outside of that, it's just a matter of showing what I'm here to do.
Right.
There's definitely meetings. If I sit down on product meetings, I'm not going to have a whole lot to add because it's yeah, this is working. We're not creating any issues. I'm just here to listen, but still knowing what's happening. While other areas, I definitely have a stronger voice in. So particularly, like I said, we work with accounting and our finance teams a lot.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have constant communication with them when we're at the tail end of closing deals or once a contract's in place, what's happening. So just making sure you're having those relationships and having a very streamlined form of communication. There's nothing more frustrating than one person talking to one person in an email chain and then both of them are on PTO and we're just kind of okay, so what happened? Where's the communication?
Yeah.
And then also particularly with sales, working very, very closely with sales, wanting to build a very good relationship with them.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously, sales, they need to sell. That's their focus. And that's why they do that. And that's why I don't do that, because that's not my role. And I don't want that to be my role. But just working to be a strong partner.
Yeah.
And one thing I always say is that, we don't want to be the department of no.
Exactly.
Yes, we may have to say no sometimes.
Sure.
But we're going to say, no, we can't do this. But what are you actually trying to do? Let's help you get there. And being able to add the aspect of okay, what risk are you taking for the company when you're offering this or when you're changing this or when you're doing these other things? So just working really closely with them to kind of bring that perspective. And once again, showing that we're doing the work to help you get through the sale. We're going to help get it through the door. And also just once again, not delaying it. Everybody wants their project or their need to be the top priority. Sometimes it is, but not everything can be number one. Exactly. Right? So just kind of creating expectations, but still driving really hard with those expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. What? So, do you have any words of advice for people who are just getting into the role and just trying to build those relationships, whether it's with sales or accounting? What advice can you give them, tactical advice to help at least set the right tone?
Yeah, one thing that I really strongly believe in is just picking up the phone and calling somebody. Don't do everything over email. Don't do everything over Teams or Slack or whatever. Have that voice conversation, because you're going to be able to be able to be hey, how's it going? Just even that simple thing. You're not going to start a Teams message with that. And if you do, it's okay, what's actually happening here?
Right. Be hi, you tell me how it's going. What's happening now?
Yeah, I know. My response always when somebody sends me that is what's up?
Right.
What's happening? And then you're just going to be able to get to the problem quicker. And then you're going to be able to get to the solution quicker. So that's kind of my biggest thing, is just picking up the phone and calling somebody. Or if you're in office, seeing them face to face. And the other thing too is try to think of the solution before you have that conversation.
Right.
And yes, that comes with experience, and that comes with seeing something happen over and over again. But talk with another team member, to be have we seen this before? How have we handled this? So therefore, you're going into that conversation with kind of something in your back pocket that you can pull out and have a quick answer to, versus being okay, let me get back to you.
Right.
And that's my biggest thing is when you have questions, come with some potential solutions as well.
Yeah, that's I think a lesson for anybody. If you're going to your manager, if you're going to someone who needs to be a part of whatever project you're working on. Like, go in with an open mind, but go in with an idea of how to solve the issue that's at hand. It's really important, right? I think a lot of people make mistakes. They're like, oh, I have to ask my boss. And it's like, I get it. And yes, you should go ask your boss, your manager, however you want to phrase it, right? But at the same time, like, your best employees are the ones that are like, I think we should do this, but please tell me, if there's additional context or what you think, right? Like that kind of thing. What it does is it makes it a collaborative environment as opposed to please tell me what to do. Yeah. Right. Which makes things tough. So you had mentioned something earlier, like Department of No, but what are you really trying to do? So that's something that I think legal teams really, really need to focus on, is that a lot of times people will come to you with a problem and they think there's a particular legal issue that needs to be solved or a particular way that it should be solved, when in reality, oftentimes that's not the legal issue that's even close to meaningful with what they're trying to do. Yeah. So how do you have that conversation with people, I guess sort of proactively, like when people will come to you and say, hey, I've got this issue, can you help me out with this? Like, do you immediately get a sense of like, that may not be the issue, or how do you work with them to probe and really uncover what the issues are?
Yeah, my biggest thing is just always asking like why, because I feel like a lot of the times people will like give you bits and pieces of information, or once again try to like lay something out when it's like, okay, but like, what are we trying to achieve here? Right. So trying to just like figure out how to uncover that information.
And it usually assumes a particular answer or outcome.
Yeah, exactly. And just being like, okay, no, that's not one, that may be not what we want. And also, like you said, it may not be like legal's call. We get that a lot of the time. It's just kind of like, oh, people think that legal needs to be involved or it's a legal issue, and really like, hey, maybe this goes to finance, or like this actually goes to product. You need to talk to them about this. And that's kind of what I found, is just kind of having this like Rolodex in my head of like who actually they need to reach out to about this, to once again be able to like provide that solution. But yeah, I think that's the biggest thing for me, is just kind of like figuring out like, what are you actually trying to do, or like what is actually happening here, and ultimately just is like keep asking questions, and like my thing is like repeating back what I'm hearing. Right. It's like, okay, this is what you're telling me. Is that what I'm understanding here? Right. And then it's like, okay, I do understand, and this is why I'm not the person, but this is.
Right. Absolutely. So when you think about, and maybe we'll go a little bit back to the script here, but when you think about the image of the legal team and legal operations within that team across the organization, what are you trying to portray to the rest of the business?
Really just trying to show that we're an efficient team. I think that's the biggest thing for me, is like showing that there is value in what we're doing, and that we're not the holdup. I think that's a really big thing on our team, is just trying to respond to things as like quickly and as accurately as possible. We kind of have like a internal expectations versus like external expectations. Sure. So anybody from Zywave, plug your ears. But like internally, like my expectation is that like we're going through contracts or questions or requests, whatever it is, within 2 hours. Right. What we tell the team is or what we tell like the rest of the company is like, you'll hear back from us within a day. Right. Just so that way it's like, within a day is still pretty good for some legal teams. Yeah. Oh yeah, it is. And talking with other salespeople where it's like, oh, like this would have been stuck in illegal for like a week at my old company. Right. So still trying to like push, but also giving ourselves that room for grace if things get really hectic. Yeah. So wanting to show that like we are responding quickly, and even if it's just saying like, hey, I need to dig into this more, I'll get back to you, X day. Right. But just showing that we saw it and we're taking care of it. And the next thing too is I call it like having receipts, like being able to like prove like the track record that happened. Yeah. And how we got to a certain decision, or like what led to us like saying yes in this situation but not this situation. Right. So just being able to like give that information, and like I said too, accuracy. Like we very much pride ourselves, and I think all legal teams do, is like the accuracy of the information. That's right. Like people put a lot of value in what legal has to say. Mm-hmm. sometimes it's things that we don't have to comment on, but they still put value in it.
Right.
So making sure that we're presenting everything like with confidence of like what's actually within like a set of contracts or like within a certain situation.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
And how are you using data?
I'm personally using it to like look at that turnaround time, like I was talking about, like what are those times that we're actually hitting, and then also like figuring out like what types of contracts we're working on, what are we seeing like an increase in, what are we expecting to see come up, like what have we drafted but we haven't heard back on, like kind of like an internal legal pipeline versus like a sales pipeline of like what are we expecting to see come in, and therefore knowing, okay, like we still have like these 20 outstanding like potential MSA red lines and we're getting close to the end of the quarter, like we're going to need to not make sure to like pile things onto the attorneys because they're going to need to focus on these because I'm sure they're going to come in. Right.
We do the same thing.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of a quarterly cadence here. So as far as what you hope to do with your team over the next 12 months and what you hope to accomplish across the organization, what are a couple of the key things that you're looking at or focused on?
Yeah, one thing for me is just bringing more ownership to individual team members. Wanting to make sure that like the team itself feels empowered and that they have ownership over various tasks or various areas of the team. For me, it's still very important that the team can adapt to any situation. Like we don't want one person to be siloed and like they're the only person that can handle this one specific task, because that ultimately can hinder us. So I still want like everybody to kind of be able to jump in, but having them take ownership of various things still. So it's like, you may run this piece or you may run this process, but we still know how to do it.
Right.
I think that's just good overall for like any employee's like position, just to know that they take pride in what they're doing.
Yep.
And then also getting our team more kind of like comfortable and more exposure to redlinings. I think, legal ops does have the place to be able to handle negotiations. Like,
absolutely.
My thing is like, you don't have to be an attorney to be in the legal field. You don't have to be an attorney to be able to like handle red lines or negotiations.
That's right.
So getting them more exposure to that, to get them kind of being able to take on some of those ones that aren't as in depth. Yeah,
absolutely. That is an important thing. Is you don't always need an attorney's touch on a lot of these things, and oftentimes there are plenty of folks who have seen enough contracts in their life to actually be more reliable than a lot of attorneys out there. So,
right.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, and I think another thing too for me is just wanting to expand upon that data piece. I think we're very much in a data world right now. So trying to figure out like, okay, what data do we have and how can we use it best to our ability?
Yep.
And I think part of it is just kind of understanding that second piece of it. It's like, we can pull all this information from Salesforce or from LinkSquares or from whatever other service, but what does it actually mean?
Right.
So trying to get a better understanding of like what we need to see as a team and what we can point to, and then be able to like put that data in that question for us.
Yeah, that context around the data is really, really important. It's, I use the example of, let's say the CEO says, I want to start selling my product in Spain, right? And the legal team has to do all sorts of stuff, from working with your supply chain managers to make sure you get all your vendor agreements, distribution agreements, blah, 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 looking at IP regulations, all sorts of products liability stuff that may be there, whatever happens. And the CEO doesn't really care that it takes 90 hours for the legal team. What the CEO cares about is from the time that the CEO said, I want to be in Spain, to the time that the product is on the shelves in Spain is 3 months. Right?
Yep.
And so it's really about the context and having the ability to look at that data and say, what does this really mean with regard to the business? That's a critical part.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And talking about goals for the next year is a nice transition into some professional development conversation too. What advice do you have for legal ops professionals that might be listening, thinking about what the next step in their career is, taking on leadership, things like that?
Yeah, I would say, I think one thing to keep in mind is like raising your voice, like raising your hand. And if it is something where you're like, you know, legal ops is a very cross-functional piece. So like asking like, hey, are there, you know, cross-department meetings that like legal doesn't necessarily have to like speak to, but it's important for us to know that I can start sitting in on, and kind of slowly taking those roles from other team, like not from other team members, but like lessening the plate of other team members, to start to really understand the business as a whole. And I think that's a big part of it with legal ops is you have to understand like all of the business in order to do your job most efficiently and effectively. So I think that's the other thing is just making sure that you're comfortable like with the business and knowing kind of not just what like the like quote to cash process is, but what are all these other things that like make the product. And then like how are they marketed? What are they actually being talked about in sales conversations, in order to understand kind of the nuances of all pieces of it.
That makes sense. And how have you approached taking that type of role and then also, you know, taking on more of a leadership role as well? Like, how do you think about that for your team, and what advice do you have?
Yeah, one thing that I'm really big on is reflection. So in terms of like the leadership piece of it is kind of knowing that it's like, okay, I have this information, but also I need to share it with my team, and being really reflecting on myself of being like, okay, like, am I providing enough to my team? Am I providing enough contacts without providing like too much where it becomes a distraction or like, you know, a distraction? So that's one thing that I've kind of kept in mind, is just what information do I need to share, and how do I need to present that, and kind of what's going to help them make their job easiest. And then kind of going back to the reflection piece of it, for me, I read an article recently that was talking about how it's important to like journal in like a work environment whenever you have like these big emotions. So when you're feeling like frustrated or surprised or like something failed or any of kind of those big feelings, to just like stop and like write down what you're feeling, like how your body's feeling, like what happened. And then on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, go back and actually look at what you wrote down. So don't just like get it down, but look at it and kind of see if there's trends you're noticing. Like, okay, this thing is becoming a big issue for me because I've written about it like 4 times. And recognizing that to then be able to like position your kind of response, and how you can change that. Like if it's creating like if-then statements, like if this happens again, then I'm going to respond this way, or then I'm going to take this action, and kind of building that up for myself.
That's interesting. I've never heard that before.
It's a cool idea.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah. When I read the article, I was just like, I never want to look back at what I wrote down. Like, why would anybody want to do that? And then I was like, okay, there is purpose for this. So like, just kind of like really taking that and like being consistent with it. I think that's the hardest thing is like, we can have this idea of how we want to like develop ourselves professionally, but it's a matter of like sticking with it, and just really trying to like hold to that in order to see that growth.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And then how do you think about work-life balance? Because I can imagine that might be something that comes up as a big emotion for a lot of people.
It is really tough because at the end of like, we're people. We're people, we have needs, we have lives outside of work, as we should. But we still need to contribute to our job because that's why we have a job, that's why we have a career. So for me, it's just a matter of, you know, when working with my team is recognizing like you're a person, you're going to have bad days. That happens. You're going to have like issues at home or whatever it is, you know, and how is that impacting you right now with the job you're able to do? And trying to be frank about that. For me, it's like, it's not necessarily compartmentalizing, but recognizing like, okay, I'm frustrated this morning for whatever reason. I need to maybe not take phone calls for the next 2 hours, but I can still get done everything else I need to get done at this time, until I'm able to like respond to something without necessarily misdirecting frustration. So recognizing that, I think for me too, it's just about building habits. Like, you know, these are the hours I'm going to work. You need to flex those sometimes because that's just how it goes. But just having that structure where it's like, okay, this is when I'm focused on work. This is what I need to get done. Versus this feeling that like you're always working. Like that's not what I want. That's not what I want for my team at all. Like build your day as it's going to work best for you with your life, and like keep that as consistent as you can.
Yeah, that's great. And as a leader too, especially of a lean team, do you have any best practices for creating that environment where maybe you're doing that for yourself, but how do you then make sure it translates to the team?
Yeah, I definitely bring that up with team members often. It's kind of like, okay, like I saw that you sent an email late at night, like what's going on? You know, like why are you doing this? You know, this is an email that probably could have waited till the morning and it would have been fine. And I understand sometimes you're just kind of like, I'm thinking about this, I just need to get it done. Like that's fine. But not to have it be a habit. And kind of just like representing that of saying like, hey, if you're working, you know, like 8 to 5, that's fine. Like if you took a break during the day for a doctor's appointment and you want to catch up on those hours, okay, but just let me know so that I know why you're doing these things.
Right.
And why you're maybe working later or earlier than we had previously talked about. You know, I think it's about being flexible, but still kind of like enforcing that balance.
Right.
Because it's hard in a remote world. I think we've all seen that kind of ebb and flow over the past couple of years. And then the other thing too with the lean team is documentation and communication. The past couple of years, I've kind of took on a personal project to document as much as our processes as possible.
Nice.
And creating playbooks when we can.
Yeah.
So like I said, we're able to kind of like plug and play people when needed so that people can take a break.
Right.
They can take time off without it being detrimental.
Right. That's great advice. All right. Well, we end every episode with some rapid fire questions. So if you're ready, what is your hot take on legal ops?
My hot take is that I think this kind of goes back to what I said earlier, but that you're not a support role. You are a fully functional like part of the team, part of the department, and that you don't need a law degree. Sorry, lawyers, but like I don't need a law degree to like be able to like be capable and do things.
That's awesome.
Making enemies today. Sorry.
No, I think that's wonderful. Most lawyers who are in-house will like to use their law degree less and less, right?
That's great. That's what hot takes are for.
That's right.
What is your number one tip for finding work-life balance?
Setting boundaries. And setting boundaries is not just like, I'm working during these times. This is my work time. This is my home time. But setting boundaries of like, do I need to respond to this meeting invite or can somebody else on my team handle it? Or maybe legal doesn't even need to be involved in this conversation. So like setting those boundaries in terms of like tasks and, expectations as well.
What is the best leadership advice that you've either given or received?
It's okay to have empathy. It's good to have empathy. Don't distrust your empathy.
Awesome.
And we always ask, what's a charity or a cause that's close to your heart that you think the listener should check out?
Yes. I think listeners should check out POWERS. It stands for Pregnancy Options Wisconsin Education Resources Support.
Okay.
So it's Wisconsin-based, but it's helps a lot of surrounding states as well. But it's a nonprofit made up of doctors, midwives, doulas, educators, whose focus is trusting pregnant people.
Okay.
And providing resources and education and information for the broad spectrum of experiences pregnant people have, and knowing that their opinion and that they have options.
That's awesome. And what is it, powers.org?
I believe it is Pregnancy Options WI.
Okay.
.org.
We can figure out. We'll make sure.
Just Google POWERS Wisconsin.
All right. We'll make sure we actually get the link. We'll link it on the post. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, and and thanks for coming in the studio too. This is awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I was excited to have this opportunity, and I may not be the most knowledgeable person, but I can talk about what I know.
Well, hey, that's what we're trying to get out. So, thanks again. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.